Hey everybody, a little different scenery instead of in my car. Shout out to Sergeant Gaden from the 322nd. That's my brother. Yeah, he kind of gave me the confidence that I needed to keep going during those little rough days, a lot rougher than they have now. So shout out to him for never losing who he was. He's achieved everything that an MTI could ever achieve. So if you ever need any help, Mark Gaten, he's at 322nd right now. Outstanding dude. All right, so this is going to be about MTI tools. And MTI tools can sometimes be overused. And the whole purpose of MTI tools is to ensure that trainees learn from their mistakes by giving them things that they need to do in order that they won't do it again and they understand. So there's going to be a couple MTI tools that a lot of people don't use. And I'm not really going to talk about them like Airman's Time or whatever like that. But I am going to talk about some of the ones that people could overuse, and you have to be very, very careful of it. The first thing I want to talk about is bed proficiency drills. Bed proficiency drills. So in bed proficiency drills, basically is that you're trying to help them achieve proficiency. But if you don't apply this well, they will not learn. And that's the whole point of bed proficiency drills. So you get a minimum of 5 minutes to do whatever part of the bed. So a lot of times when people say a minimum of 5 minutes, they're like the whole bed. No, you can do pieces of the bed. And I do encourage you to do that. Another thing that you have to do in bed proficiency drills, you have to use a wingman. Now, I'm against the wingman concept when you have two people that don't know what they're doing. Because when you don't use wingmen, they do twice as many hospital corners. And they apply twice as much. And they do their own bed. I don't mind bed proficiency drills, provided that you make it something that they can achieve so they can look back and go, wow, I'm so much better. I'm not going to let this beat me anymore. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was. So when you do bed proficiency drills, my advice to you is that when you pick your teams, you have to make sure when they start saying go, that you're always giving that constant feedback. You're going around, making sure everybody's successful. I wouldn't use it as a punishment tool, like, haha, I'm making you do beds, because that's not what it's for. It's for them to get better at making their beds because they're not meeting the standard of making beds. So take that for what it's worth. Make the most of this time. So they're doing it. You're making corrections. You're going around. Boom, boom, boom. Maybe you're giving them 15 minutes for 2 beds, which I think that means they really know what they're doing. I would say 20 minutes for 2 beds. This will allow you to be able to get around, and when somebody's not achieving the desired output, you can actually put a stop to it, bring everybody here and say, hey, look, this is what happens when you don't tuck enough under the bed. This is what happens when you don't tell me that the blankets are torn. This is what happens when these blankets or the sheets mainly are too long or too big or too wide or whatever the case is. So be part of the team. A lot of MTIs, they don't make them a part of the bed proficiency drills. Remember, it's your responsibility to make sure that they can achieve this standard. So when people walk your dorm, they know that they're going to walk into a dorm where they know that you're leading well. If you're in the 4th, 5th week of training, you're doing bed proficiency drills, I think that there's a problem. I think bed proficiency drills should be towards the beginning of the weeks of training. Bed proficiency drills should be dying down towards the end because they're already trained already. Because remember, in the 4th week of training, the 3rd and 4th week of training, what are they doing? They're doing appraisals and progress checks. So you might want to do that earlier in weeks of training to help them achieve a standard where they can have a chance to pass their appraisal and their progress check. That'd be great. Because that's a sign of a leader. Anyways, so if I was doing bed proficiency drills, I would say, hey, I would do a part of the bed. So top sheet, top blanket, go. You have 15 minutes for 2 beds. Just that. And then at the end of it, say, okay, let's everybody just take a look. So sometimes I do this. When I do feedback, I'll do this. I'll say, hey, switch bays, see who has the best bay. And they'll look. I try to make bed proficiency drills kind of like a competition a little bit because I don't want it to be like, oh, we have to do this chore. No, this is training. And their attitude needs to reflect positively to smash this bed proficiency. So the whole thing is I'm like, hey, A-Bay versus B-Bay, top blanket, top sheet, go. And then when they start really getting really good at it, then cut down the time by 2 minutes. And then what you could do is you could strip all the beds in the bay and have them as teams, A-Bay versus B-Bay, including the unoccupied beds. Now remember, bed proficiency drills can also be linen exchange. So I know some squadrons don't do linen exchange, and I hope that doesn't continue, because I think that takes away from the instructor in case they get hit with linen exchange beds. So let's talk about another tool. Exercise challenge. I will tell you the truth. I never use it, ever. And this is why. Because you're not supposed to use it to help them with PT. And once they get tired, they have to either do a modified position, but they can only do a modified position if you teach it to them. So you know how the modified push-ups, when they're trying to do the modified push-ups and they're doing it like their faces in the ground, their butts up in the air. That's because the modified position was never taught well or at all. So how can they do a modified correct push-up and to continue it? Nah. Another thing is that if they have to quit, it becomes meaningless because they can't execute proper form, and you have to pay attention to it. So I never use it. Now, back in Techno Sergeant Gaydon, in my days, there was no time limit. It was push-ups until I got tired of watching you do push-ups. And there was no counting. And it was like down for like 10 seconds, push up. 1. 4 more to go. It's not like that anymore, and it's not for PT in these days. So just keep that in mind. So if you don't show them a modified position, I wouldn't even use it. Now, instead of doing the challenge, what I would do, the exercise challenge, what I would do is I would do task repetition. That's my favorite because I think it's more appropriate. If they fail something, they need more practice getting it right. So I do a lot of task repetition, a lot. But when I do task repetition, I always make it have a purpose. For example, I don't do a lot of time limits as long as they sweating through it. If I see that they're hustling, I'm not counting. But if they're like lollygagging around and then I have to start counting to adults, oh, they paying the price. I'm not a big counter. I want you to hustle. When an element leader says get in the day room, Dorothy says get in the day room, and MTI says it, it's like put your stuff away and like a bomb went off. I better see sweat coming off your brow from the bays or from the latrine to the day room. Period. End of discussion. If you ain't sweating, you ain't working. So what I do is when they don't have that sense of purpose, I'll go like, all right, let's play a game. Wall lockers, then put the back on the wall locker. Hallway, they'll line up in the hallway. Wall lockers, get it back in the wall lockers. Day room, in the day room. And if they're not hustling, I start counting, and the time is going to be like, if they're not hustling, I'm going to be like 5, 4. Oh, you didn't make it. Because if they're not moving, I'm going to start counting, and it's not going to be fair counting. Because I want them to know that I don't need to count for them to be in a hurry. I want it to be intrinsic inside. So this type of task repetition is always teaching a sense of urgency. Because towards the end of training, if you don't have your foot on the gas, they're going to move slower and slower and slower because it takes a while. It just takes a while to really push them because, they've been there, done that before. And if you let off the gas, you'll lose them. So sometimes I'll do this task repetition at least once a week just to make sure. But if they're moving real fast, I'll be like, hey, I'll praise them to make sure they keep going. So I do a lot of task repetition for just basically moving a sense of urgency. I might do for reporting statements. If I don't get a reporting statement, these are early weeks of training, I'll make sure everybody practices. I'm not punishing everybody. I'm giving everybody practice. So I'll be like, hey, because this is what I teach them. I give them a chance to correct each other. So in the early weeks of training, report statements are going to come out. So I would say you have 3 seconds to make that correction on your wingman. So I'd be like, hey, training, come here. Hey, where are you from? I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina. And then somebody needs to be like in 3 seconds or less. Hey, report statement. Hey, stand at attention. Because if I catch them not standing at attention, they'll stand at attention for a while. I'll just make them stand at attention and do nothing. Task repetition. I teach them to take care of themselves. So I'll just do it like this. As soon as they start saying like Fayetteville, North Carolina without a report statement, I go. And after a while, I won't throw up a hand anymore. And then there have been times where I've done it like 100 times. I just kept forgetting to hold each other accountable. Because when it all comes down to it, that's what we all need to do in the Air Force, hold each other accountable. So these task repetitions, the purpose of this is to be able to hold each other accountable, call each other out to make sure everybody meets the standard or exceeds the standard. So that's what my task repetitions are all about. I like to talk about squadron beautification. You got to get leadership approval. But my type of squadron beautification is kind of in the dorm, and I don't need approval to do like a squadron beautification in my dormitory because it's not squadron beautification in the squadron area. It's in my dorm. What do I mean by that? You know how some people, like my favorite task repetition is getting the whole flight in the latrine. When the latrine crew is getting abused, people are not putting up the toilet seats, or they're not wiping off the sink so they don't have water spots on them when they dry or whatever like that. I get the whole flight in there. I find some metal polish, and everybody finds a sink. Everybody finds a toilet with chrome on it, a shower head, a drain or whatever, and they chrome it out. And once they do that, they won't mess with the latrine crew ever again. Because now they put some work in the latrine as well. So sometimes you need to do this in like a second week of training. Because, third week of training, MTIR, even though it's expectable, all weeks of training, third week of training is when the stand team starts really coming. So I try to make it really glistening at the end of the second week of training. I say, nope. And guess what? Latrine crew is not helping. They do it every day. You will not abuse them. You will respect them. You will leave it better than how they cleaned it. Period. End of discussion. And when the latrine starts getting 0 demerits, it's not the latrine crew. It's a flight effort. It's the entire flight getting 0 demerits at that point. And I appreciate it. And they get rewarded for that. When I get like 0 demerits like 3 days in a row and I can't find anything, the whole flight gets rewarded because it takes a whole flight effort to get that done. So that's really all I wanted to talk about on MTI tools. I usually don't use, I use some all the time, like raised voice and everything like that. But as long as you don't overuse some of these things, you're fine. You're fine. My favorite MTI tool to use is phone calls. I love rewarding families and letting the families know that, hey, they're kicking butt and here you go. They need to hear your voice. Give them some extra strength and encouragement, families. And I really don't do it for the trainees. I do it for the families because they miss them. It's my favorite thing to do. What's the longest phone call I've ever given? Like 45 minutes, an hour. When they're exceeding my standards, I'm not an easy MTI, by no means. My standards are astronomical. But when they can achieve it and they sustain it, I reward them because my standards are not easy. My standards are not BMT standards. They go above and beyond. And in case people make a mistake or whatever, we can cover it up real fast and still achieve the standard. So I hope that you do the same thing too. Anyways, so hey, thanks for listening to me. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you took a little bit from this. All right. God bless. Take care.